Being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. A new ballot for strikes is set to be held later this month. Gatwick Airport was forced to shut a runway for almost an hour following a suspected drone incident earlier today. Flights were temporarily suspended and 12 inbound planes were diverted to other airports. British Airways says one of its flights was affected, with it landing at Stansted before refuelling and returning to Gatwick. A spokesperson for the airport says passenger safety is the airport's absolute priority and the investigations have now been completed. Suggestions of unrest within the Conservative Party are being downplayed after the Prime Minister was blamed for the recent local election results. Rishi Sunak's facing criticism after nearly 1,000 councillors were lost and the decision to scale back post-Brexit plans to scrap EU laws. Former Home Secretary Priti Patel accused the leader of failing to listen to his party, adding the Tories hadn't covered itself in glory since Boris Johnson's leadership. Energy Secretary Grant Shapps says the Prime Minister is doing the right things and the people need to be patient.
I think this, and she was referring to this set of elections, which were obviously very difficult for the Conservatives. There weren't a good set of elections for us. But this was the first opportunity people have had to comment on all the shenanigans of last summer and those many leadership changes that went on. I think people were venting their frustration. I actually think that Rishi Sunak, in his 5-point plan to halve inflation and grow the economy and reduce our debt and cut the NHS waiting list and stop the small boats, I think he's doing exactly the right things, and let's judge him against that. Let's judge this government against that when it comes to the next election.
Counting's underway in Turkey to establish who will be the next country's leader. Voters have been deciding on whether President Erdogan, who's been in power for 20 years, should be re-elected. Opinion polls ahead of the ballot gave his main rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu a slight lead, but a clearer indication of the first round result is expected this evening. And the Ukrainian president has received an award during his visit to Germany. He was presented with the International Charlemagne Prize of Action in recognition of the Ukrainian people and Volodymyr Zelensky's fight for freedom against what's been described as the unjustified Russian war of aggression. The board of directors said the award underscores the fact that Ukraine is part of Europe and the country supports the bloc's European values. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Free Speech Nation.
Welcome, this is Free Speech Nation. On tonight's show, after Trainspotting author Irvine Welsh says J.K. Rowling's been demonised for her feminist views, is the Harry Potter author merely a victim of Twitter? After the prison service says calling criminals is offensive, what exactly should we call them? We'll be speaking to a former prisoner, if I'm allowed to call him that, to get his take. And we'll hear how summer school Living Freedom has made its mission to defend free speech right up our street. My studio guests this evening are comedians Cressida Wetton and Francis Foster. To kick things off, let's get some questions from the audience. Our first question is from Christina.
So, does Elon Musk really believe in free speech, or is he just a greedy billionaire?
Does Elon Musk believe in free speech? This is relating to Twitter boss Elon Musk, who confirmed the social media platform is blocking content in Turkey ahead of upcoming presidential elections, which are happening today. He didn't specify details about which tweets would be affected or who made the request. I should imagine it's somebody on the president's side, though. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has previously blocked the site and is facing a strong challenge in the election from Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the other guy. Musk wrote, "Did your brain fall out of your head, Iglesias?" That's him responding to a journalist who asked him. So he says the choice is to either throttle Twitter entirely or limit access to some tweets that are mildly critical of the president. Which one do you want? He said. I mean, what do you make of this, Francis? I mean, this seems like, I don't know, tech companies are caught between a rock and a hard place. He's got the choice of either not censoring the president's opponents or having Twitter completely cut off.
Well, at that point, you've got to ask, so what are his values? Is he actually pro-free speech? And if he's pro-free speech, doesn't that actually mean that you're then going to pay the price for your free speech?
Yeah.
No, he's playing the long game, surely. This is like not swearing for Ofcom, isn't it? He's got to keep within the lines and make sure that... Because Erdogan's got previous. He shut down Twitter before when there might have been some unhappy people with his response to the earthquake. So he's got to do this, surely, for the greater good.
It's interesting that you compare Ofcom to a dictator.
You've been working at GB News too long, Cressida.
I'm just saying, there are limits. You've got to play within the rules of the game, haven't you?
So he's just working within the rules, just as anybody posting on Twitter is working within the guidelines of Twitter.
Well, look, Elon Musk has come out as a free speech absolutist, and he said, this is one of the cornerstones of Western civilization. But the reality is, when it comes to other parts of the world, turns out they don't like it.
Well, we've seen this with other tech organisations that have worked with, for example, the Chinese government to limit access. I mean, I can't remember which... Did Google work with the Chinese government to...
I mean, they all probably work with the Chinese government, mate, do you know what I mean?
But not just manufacturing the mobile phones and things. This is actually, you know, limiting access to sites and limiting search results.
Well, the reality is that if you want to operate in these countries, then you have to adhere by their rules. And a lot of these countries have, dare I say it, gender-critical leaders, mate. So...
Well, the good thing is here, Musk got it all out in the open. We know that he's going to be doing this. It's not shadow banning, it's not sneaky. So that's quite good, isn't it, to know what's going to happen?
So he's being open about restricting free speech?
Yes.
I mean, that's not that great for somebody who's supposed to be a free speech absolutist.
Well, the point is that we know it's happening, so you can kind of make it, you can adjust for that, can't you, when you're reading Twitter?
But if he did just stick to free speech absolutism and turn down the president's request to censor his opponents, wouldn't people then be forced to access Twitter through VPNs and be able to have the full free speech experience?
Well, we're not all tech brilliant smarty pants like you, Lou. I wouldn't actually know how to do that myself. Yeah, I guess, so that's an option, is it? We'd have to go to VPNs. Well, they would have to go to VPNs.
That's what people do in China, and
Right.
I think in Scotland as the SNP get increasingly authoritarian. But moving on, our next question is from Lyle. Where is Lyle?
Hi. Hi, nice to be on again. Mine's about the wafting smell of barbecues that's offending neighbours. As an architect, I see potential work coming in from here, building 100-foot-high glass walls. Maybe that'll be the solution.
So this relates to earlier this week, a vegan family, Sarah, Wayne and kids, I don't think the name is kids, sent an angry letter to their neighbour, Kylie. Were these people named in the 80s? I'm getting that vibe. Over the smell of their barbecue meat coming into their home and making them feel sick. They have since followed up with a last warning letter threatening to report Kylie, presumably to some level of authority, and go to social media if she doesn't give in to their demands. I mean, I'm amazed vegans could find the energy to do that, Cressida.
Brilliant. Well, I don't think it goes far enough. I think anybody that wears body spray on public transport should get a fixed penalty notice on the spot. You know,
You'd rather people smell of BO?
I'd rather they didn't smell of anything. I'd sort of take her point. I mean, I wouldn't go writing notes.
Yeah. Is that too passive-aggressive for you?
Yeah, for sure.
Cressida's aggressive.
Yeah, if I'm going to be aggressive, you'll know about it.
Would you be straight round there with smashing a bottle of Bud Light and sticking it in their face?
No, I'd probably be on the phone moaning to a friend. Yeah, maybe I'm passive-aggressive. I don't know. I'm amazed that this woman took a pen and paper. I mean, wait it out. It's temporary, isn't it?
And it's good, but it's going to be a bigger, an increasing problem as we go into the summer. A lot of people have gone plant-based, and the smell of barbecue meat, although, you know, normal people find it delicious, people who aren't normal can be disgusted by it.
Well, I see it like this. If they're going to get offended by it, then I'm allowed to be offended by vegans coming into a space, eating a whole bag full of lentils, and then contaminating the atmosphere with their methane and creating their own miniature weather system.
Which is a horrific greenhouse gas.
Exactly.
Let's not forget.
And contributes to global warming.
Yeah.
So in many ways, they're part of the problem.
They are part of the problem. I mean, Cressida, don't you see this?
I can't say I've had any big problems with vegan farts that I'm aware of.
You didn't spend long enough on the comedy circuit, Cressida.
We've all got to get along, haven't we? Maybe the big glass walls are the answer. Keep everyone separate.
Yeah. I think pushing, because I've seen so much vegan food being pushed on us. If you go to get a sandwich at Marks and Spencer's, I got one. I got a yellow sticker sandwich, one of their plant-based. It was supposed to be a no-lamb shawarma, and I'm not joking. The stuff that was supposed to be lamb. I know vegan food is, you know, it's got the reputation of being disgusting, but this was just insane, rancid. It was like boiled inner tube. It was.
Well, look, I don't mind people having disgusting food. I hate that food has got so political. It's like you can't just buy a sandwich now without it being a political comment, and I find that a bit tiresome.
I love eating a sandwich and supporting gay people. Do you remember when the LGBT Marks and Spencer's released that? It's brilliant.
Well, think how thick that sandwich is going to be now that there's all those other letters in the LGBTQ2SAA++
hyphen * Ukraine flag symbol. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But think about it. If you eat an LGBT sandwich, you're giving 2 fingers up to Saudi Arabia because number 1, it's pro-gay, and number 2, you're eating bacon.
2 fingers up, you say. Anyway, our next question is from Alan. Where's Alan? Over here.
Hello. Should you get a pay rise even when you're not working?
Well, I should. Now, this is about a man who's been on sick leave since 2008, who's suing his employer for not giving him a pay rise in the meantime, arguing that inflation is withering away his salary. So he's called Ian Clifford. He's employed by tech giant IBM, but he's been off sick for the past 15 years. Just your average British worker, really. And according to his LinkedIn profile, he's been medically retired since 2013. Under the terms of the company's health plan, where an employee has the right to earn 3/4 of their agreed earnings, Clifford has received an annual payment of £54,028 and will keep doing so until he's 65. So in the end, he'll have received about £1.5 million for sitting at home on his couch. I'm not sure what's wrong with him. Maybe it's something terribly serious and we shouldn't be laughing. But I mean, what do you make of this?
I tell you what, I bet he writes a fantastic neighbour complaint note. What do I make of it? I mean, good on him. Wow, it's really impressive, isn't it, to extract that much money for absolutely nothing. Don't blame the player, blame the game, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, those are incredible rules because, I mean, most places you get some sick pay and then it's statutory sick pay and then you're left to die.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as somebody who comes from a nation that is famously work-shy, Leo, there's got to be a part of you that admires...
talking about Britain?
Well, Scotland.
Scotland. Oh, you're talking about me? I thought you were talking about your Venezuelan heritage. Man, at least we're not going through the bins in Scotland, Francis.
Give it 5 years under Humza, mate.
That's a fair point. I mean, Scotland is basically Venezuela with worse weather. But I mean, do you think he's right to ask for a raise when he's not actually done anything?
I think do you know when you get away with something and you think, I wonder how much more I can get away with? Like, you've somehow managed to get backstage at the Rolling Stones concert and you think, I wonder if I can pretend I'm in the band. And you just keep pushing to see what you can get. I think it's extraordinary. But we don't know what he's off sick with. So that, is it something that IBM did? We don't know.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. That is very true. So maybe all we know is that he's probably a member of the Labour Party.
Probably running it. Anyway, our final question for the moment is from Catherine. Catherine, hello.
Has Shakespeare's Globe taken trigger warnings too far?
Has Shakespeare's Globe taken trigger warnings too far? And this is about an actor with dwarfism who's triggered ableism warnings for A Midsummer's Night's Dream at Shakespeare's Globe, which has been added to an earlier warning of violence, sexual references, misogyny and racism. After casting the role of Hermia, the Globe has updated their content guidance to include ableism, discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities, but claimed Shakespeare's script only became ableist when Francesca Mills, an actor with achondroplasia, was cast in March as the young Athenian woman Hermia. We've spoken to her and she's grumpy. You get it?
I do get it, mate. Absolutely.
I was expecting a bigger laugh. No, she's not. She's actually delighted. She always wanted to play this part. She wanted to perform at the Globe, and she's delighted. But it seems a little... it's almost insulting of the Globe to say that, warn people that there's a dwarf in the play.
Well, look... What they did is they cast this actress, and I'm sure she's very good, but then they've cast her in the role, and then she gets loads of insults hurled at her about her size.
In the script, not by the audience.
No, not by the audience, right? However, which is kind of like inviting a vegan into a steak restaurant, and then when they start crying, going, that's right, have some more filet mignon. Do you know what I mean?
This is a great idea, Francis.
Yeah. It's a hell of a game show.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like trigger warnings, full stop. I mean, surely the fun of going to see Shakespeare is that you're going to be horrified or whatever. Well, my first experience with Shakespeare was at school. We were at primary school and a theatre company came and did Macbeth with us. Yeah. And it was brilliant. We were kids, we wanted to be scared by witches and violence and all that stuff. So I'm not a fan of the trigger warnings at all. I think they should get rid of all of them. I mean, it's for grown-ups, it's Shakespeare. What are you expecting?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And do you think there's a risk that political correctness is actually driving, people with disabilities out of. There's a risk it could drive people out of performing. I mean, I know, dwarves. There used to be an industry of dwarves appearing in pantomimes, and now that's not seen as politically correct anymore. So, but it's obviously probably more fun than stacking shelves, and also they can't reach the shelves, so that's not any use to them anyway.
Well, thanks for that one, Lee. I don't quite know what I'm going to say to that, but it makes me think about the whole thing about trigger warnings, and it's just, number one, it's patronising. Number two, has anybody really ever been triggered by a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah.
Maybe you've been bored by it, but you've never come out of it going, oh my God, I can never function again in society.
You need to meet somebody under the age of 35, Francis. That is exactly what they're like.
However, I will tell you a story. It's a little bit risque. There was a comedy night, and this is the main reason I hate to hear trigger warnings. There was a comedy night called Trigger Warning a few years ago in Edinburgh. Yeah. And the promoter had a T-shirt called Trigger Warning to promote the show. Yeah. There was only one problem. He was wearing a shirt over it, so it hid the T and the R.
Oh, no.
So it looked like he was going round and being very problematic.
Yeah. OK. Our next question is from GB viewer Ryan. It says, why does Liz Truss want to destroy Britain? So I think what he's talking about here is Liz Truss wants UK hard power to bolster Taiwan against China's threat. So the former PM, she was PM for about 3 minutes, she's expected to say that if the West wants to avoid war in the South China Sea, it must get real about military cooperation. A prominent China hawk when she served as Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, Ms Truss has made Taiwan one of the key areas of interest for her post-Downing Street career. What do you make of this, Cressida?
I don't know what to make of this. I mean, is she going to trigger more trouble, or is she going to stop trouble? I'm not sure which way. I know you've got a lot of views.
If I was Taiwan, I'd be very worried about Liz Truss getting involved. Do you think she's...
Exactly. Hello, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Oh, my God.
Do you think Xi Jinping put her up to this?
Yeah, quite possibly. God, that's so cynical and so possible. Yeah, maybe they're best mates. I don't know.
It is. It's like you make a point and all of a sudden Katie Hopkins pops up and goes, I agree with you. You're like, ah! No! I mean, why are we listening to Liz Truss's opinion about anything? Well, genuinely.
Actually, in fairness to Liz Truss,
she'd had 45 days in power.
I agreed with her stance on tax. We need lower taxes. But what she didn't do was announce a raft of public sector cost cutting to pay for the tax cuts, which was her big mistake. She should have just gone OK, every third person at a local authority, you don't have a job tomorrow. That was her big mistake. But I think maybe the UK has been bolstered by our success in supporting Ukraine. We're finally doing all right in Eurovision. Well, we were last year, not anymore. So now we're looking. Where else can we have an impact?
Well, look, this is true. The reality is that situation is very, very, very worrying because, as we all know, Taiwan is one of the premier manufacturers of semiconductors. I don't actually know what semiconductors do, but apparently they're very important.
Yeah, they are. They're in everything. Yeah. So they're like microplastics. Anyway, coming up on Free Speech Nation, we'll be talking to a Harvard professor about how academics are fighting back to ensure free speech reigns supreme on university campuses. See you soon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Leo Kearse. Now, the strangling of free speech in universities across this country is something we talk about a lot on this programme. It's no surprise it's happening overseas too, but did you know academics at none other than Harvard University are trying to turn the tide? So how exactly are they going about it? Johnstone family professor of psychology at Harvard University, Steve Pinker, joins us from Massachusetts. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And tell us about what you're doing at Harvard.
A group of faculty have formed a council that has no official status, but we have banded together so that to make free speech a thing, that is to have one constituency that actually is saying that it's a good thing. There's a huge institutionalized bureaucracy of diversity and inclusion and belonging that seems to have no particular concern for academic freedom. We thought that there should be some entity that actually stands up for it. We also plan to push back when a group of activists are screaming into the ear of some dean or provost or president, and they're liable to do the easy thing, make the problem go away by just dispensing some verbiage that makes them feel good, or to fire a person who said something offensive. We'll be, I don't want to say we're going to be screaming into the other ear, but we're going to be speaking forcefully into the other ear so that they'll have to do the reasoned thing instead of just the easiest thing.
Right, yeah. And why do you believe there's a need for such an organisation? Is the situation really so bad?
It's pretty bad. Majority of, or almost a majority of our students feel that they can't say what they believe. At a university, that's a real problem because it's all about examining beliefs, stating things and showing whether they are true or false, because no one is infallible, no one's omniscient. The only way we can find out what's true or false is to say something and then evaluate it. You might be wrong. Also, it just saps the entire credibility of the university and the academic enterprise. I've told people, say when it comes to climate change, look, there's an enormous consensus among scientists that human activity is warming the planet. And they say, well, what difference does it make if there's consensus? Everyone knows that if you disagree from the consensus, you get canceled. So why should we take the scientific consensus seriously? Now, in this case, I think the scientific consensus happens to be true. But how do we make that case if the public rightly believes that any criticism will be squelched? So it's really safeguarding the entire the credibility of the enterprise and the integrity of the enterprise, because you can't figure out what's true and what's false unless you say things so they can be evaluated.
Amazing. And I was shocked by some of the statistics. I mean, between 2014 and 2022, so in just 8 years, there were 877 attempts to punish scholars in American university that you logged. That resulted in 156 firings, which is more than under the McCarthy witch hunts. I mean, these are incredible numbers. These are, livelihoods being destroyed.
These are livelihoods being destroyed, and this is a distortion of our understanding of the truth. The motto of my employer is veritas, truth. We're kind of in the truth business. Not that we have the truth, but we have a means to figure out the truth, namely to debate, to argue, to hold things up to the standards of evidence. If there's some things you just can't say, we're guaranteed to be locked into error. We're guaranteed to give the wrong advice on how to reduce crime, how to reduce inequality, how to fight pandemics. There has to be an ability to get ideas out there so that the entire community can scrutinize them.
And what's the reaction so far from other colleagues and from the students themselves?
Hard to tell because we haven't done a poll. One reaction is the fact that we haven't been joined by the entire faculty might say something a little bit discouraging. But as soon as it was announced, we did get a lot of colleagues joining and a lot of people at other universities saying, that's a really good idea. I think we're going to try it at our university. Students are divided. There was an opinion piece in the Crimson, the campus newspaper, that kind of wrung their hands and grimaced about it without really coming up with any arguments against it. But then there was a counter editorial by a minority of the editorial board saying, yes, we're sick of older people telling us what we can say and what we can't say. I'm hoping that it can revive some of the spirit of the 60s and 70s when it was actually the campus left that was the strongest advocates for free speech.
Yeah, I mean, that's what surprised me, is how it's the left who, in the 80s, were campaigning for seditious works of art to be shown in galleries and controversial plays to be staged. And now they've flipped, and it's the right trying to support the freedoms. Do you think there's a danger in some of the techniques that the right are using to try and push back against this censorship?
Yeah, I think so. There are efforts in some states to actually pass legislation on what you can't say. And that's kind of missing the point. The idea is not that there should be laws that you can't say such and such. There should be laws saying you can say anything as long as it's not libelous or extortion or defamation. But politicians will be tempted to put a thumb on the scale, which is not going to help because it's just going to introduce distortions from the other side. And we're mindful of not being, even though a lot of the threats to free speech come from the left, not all of them. And the idea is not for this to be a right-wing organization pushing back. Quite the contrary. We are a bunch of professors, so we do tend to lean to the left in the first place. But that's kind of beside the point. The idea is that the principle of free speech should not depend on whether you're on the right or the left. That's missing the point. The point is you should be able to say anything as long as it's reasoned and you provide evidence and you're not attacking the person, but you're examining the idea.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever see a complete turn in the tide on this constant battling against freedom of speech?
I don't think we'll see complete victory, just because I'm a psychologist. I study human nature, and it's a part of human nature to just assume that we ourselves are correct and virtuous, and the people who disagree with us are stupid and evil and ignorant. The idea that there can be disinterested, objective truth, that we can all work together to try to find it, I think that's a great idea, but it's a deeply weird idea in human history. I mean, it's a product of the Enlightenment, and it's a constant battle to remind people that that's the best way to determine the truth.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for joining us. That's Professor of Psychology at Harvard University, Stephen Pinker. Thank you. Good luck with your mission.
Thank you.
Let's bring in my esteemed panel now. Cresta, why do you think we're seeing such a push against free speech and free inquiry at universities?
Maybe because people are getting away with it. We keep having these horrible, violent protests, don't we, when somebody tries to say something that somebody else doesn't like. Which, I mean, when I went to university, we were allowed to kick ideas into a dark corner, see where they went. It didn't matter. And in that time since, things seem to have got a lot more sensitive, particularly in America.
Yeah. And I mean, Francis, as Professor Pinker says, we need to have the freedom to question ideas, to strengthen those ideas, and also to give them legitimacy in people's eyes.
One of the most profound things I've ever actually heard on the subject of free speech was on my show Trigonometry. We interviewed a journalist called Ed West. And I said to him, Ed, why is free speech so important? And he said, because without free speech, then you're never going to talk about a problem honestly. Therefore, you're never going to talk about every facet of the problem. And if you don't talk about every facet of the problem, then how are you going to hope to solve that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can't argue with that.
I mean, you can.
No, you can't argue with that. It's banned. I mean, Cressida, do you see this changing? Do you see the tide turning?
Oh, I don't know. One of the things I saw that I was really moved by was Yumni Park being interviewed by Jordan Peterson, and she gave this account of her degree. And so she's a North Korean defector who escaped and got to fulfil her father's dream of her going to university in the States. And she found herself in classes not being able to say what she really thought. And she was just so disappointed because she thought that when she got to America, that would be it.
It's the land of freedom.
Yeah.
Where it used to be.
And of course, her argument is always, look, when I escaped North Korea, there was America to escape to, you know, and if it disappears altogether, it's kind of game over. I think this is a fantastic move in the right direction.
Great. Well, after the break on Free Speech Nation, the summer school with a twist on free will in the 21st century. Don't go away.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Watching.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel, Cressida Wetton and Francis Foster, to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So you can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll try to answer your issues, whatever they are, but please try and keep it clean. This is a family-friendly show. Anyway, with words being banned from our daily vocabulary faster than you can say woke, how does a person have freedom of thought, will and conscience in the 21st century? Living Freedom is a summer camp set up to explore the many issues which threaten the way we were born to think, question and debate, well, pretty much everything. The camp's convener, Alistair Donald, and young art historian and one of the event's speakers, Ella Nixon, join me now. Thanks for coming in. Alistair, do you want to start off by telling us about the camp?
Yeah, Living Freedom is an initiative set up by the charity that I work for, Ideas Matter, and its basis is to interest young adults in freedom and discussing and debating and engaging with all issues related to freedom. The summer school is existed since 2017, so every year, and we get about 50, 60 people together of all ages within that 18 to 30 range who discuss all sorts of ideas over the course of 3 days and hopefully come out at the end of it richer and more informed and hopefully more convinced of the importance of freedom and free speech.
And the course is for 18 to 30-year-olds. I mean, why do you think it's important to be discussing this stuff with young people, Ella?
Well, I think there's a lot of people at university don't really think about what freedom of expression is, or maybe they don't know, they've never experienced it. And I think for me it was really important to go there and just out of curiosity to see what it was and kind of get a feel for it. Yeah. Because you don't know what you don't have until you experience it.
So you were there as an attendee last year and now you're speaking at it this year?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, last year was my first bit of involvement with the organisation, and it was really eye-opening. And it just gave me a real taste for what where free speech can get us, and it's really helped me to develop my thinking and writing since. And
what are you going to be speaking about at the event?
I'm going to be speaking about sensitivity readers,
right?
Especially reflecting on like Roald Dahl's, the Puffin book debacle, I guess, earlier this year. And I'm going to say what's wrong with updating old books.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed they never get a sensitivity reader for the Quran. They're quite happy to re-edit some children's books by an author who's dead. But, I mean, do you honestly think that people see progress as dangerous?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? That's the question we're going to ask. It's interesting that people are talking about progress again just now. I mean, to me, progress, you look in things like the French Revolution and it was all about liberty and equality, and it was very much bound up with those Enlightenment notions. Yeah,
but it led to cutting off heads.
Yeah, well, yes.
It liberated heads
so therein comes the argument of the last 200 years about its worth and its value. I think it's interesting that people are more and more anti-progress these days, and interesting even that they're anti-progress because they see it as a problem for freedom rather than part of the package of gaining freedom, and that's what we want to discuss.
And yeah, this is something that really surprises me. I mean, even though the phrase, the word free speech, well, the two words free speech is seen as some sort of problematic. People assume that you must be some sort of far-right conservative Nazi if you want free speech, because I mean, obviously the Nazis were incredibly keen on free speech.
Of course, yes. I mean, that's one of the things that we try to do with the summer school, is to mix it up a little bit, and it is open to quite a wide variety of people. We tend to get people who've got all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different political views and interests, and we find that the common starting point of an interest in freedom, I mean, obviously you're coming to a Living Freedom school, then you've got that starting point, but beyond that, really, there is so much for discussion, and that's what makes the sessions interesting. Even discussions around freedom and free speech and how they work, I think, are very much open to interpretation. So, to give an example, this year we're going to do a session on the heckler's veto, which is the protests that commonly happen outside universities. Edinburgh and Cambridge recently, which were on the show last week, where people are trying to stop films being shown. And you think, well, on the one hand, that's terrible. The hecklers are trying to shut down someone's free speech. But on the other hand, some of the things that are happening to these hecklers, being banned from campus or banned from attending protests, you think, well, actually, that's mitigating against their freedom. So I think these things are complicated.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we want to do at the school is to try and delve into things a little bit and really try to get the people that attend to work through these issues themselves rather than assume the answers.
Yeah. And Ella, what do your peers respond to you like when you say you're involved in a free speech event and you're going to be speaking at it? I mean, do you get much opprobrium from people your own age?
Not really. I think before I started to talk about it, I was a bit more nervous about, what will people think and, what reputation will I get? But actually, most people know me and I like to think I'm not this terrible person and they know that I wouldn't be involved in it if it wasn't.
Yeah.
So if anything, it just stimulates debate and gets more people interested.
Right. And are you seeing people wanting to come to the event as a result of you talking about it? Do people get interested and want to get involved?
Yeah, I think they want to know what it is and, what freedom of expression actually is because, like you were saying before, there's all these bad stereotypes and it takes people to go there and actually say, wait a second, people here are pretty moderate and if they disagree, then it just ends in a drink at the pub afterwards and that's good fun.
Right, it's like a football match. And, what do you hope young people will take away from the camp?
I hope that they'll take away an interest in the ideas behind freedom and free speech much more. So often these days everything seems quite black and white. You have one side of the culture wars versus another side. And we do try to complicate things and recognise that the world is quite a complex place. So they can come along, they can get a little bit of history and philosophy. We'll talk about some of the great thinkers over time, not necessarily just to give them a history lesson, but to try and let them understand how these ideas emerged, but also to question how relevant they are today, what it is that we need to do to update those ideas. Yeah. And then they'll also get some of the contemporary discussions.
Brilliant.
So it's a real mixture, and I hope it fires their enthusiasm for coming back, doing what Ella's done, and come away and thought, right, I really want to get involved and produce a session and speak on a session next year. So there's plenty of opportunities to be involved in the future.
And what do you think the risks to society are if we don't have free speech?
Well, the risks are where we are now, that no one is talking to each other because everybody's so ensconced in their echo chambers and their silos that you never get to discuss anything properly. So these are tricky issues that need openly debated.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Alistair Donald and Ella Nixon from Living Freedom Summer Camp, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up on Free Speech Nation, J.K. Rowling has a new fan and not the Harry Potter kind. Don't go away.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. The author of Trainspotting, Irvine Welsh, has said that J.K. Rowling is simply trying to protect women's spaces. He went on to say that there must be some way that we can advance trans rights without attacking women's rights. With me to discuss this is the journalist Joe Bartosz. I hope. Here we go.
Hello.
Yeah, here we go. Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I mean, Irvine Welsh's stance, it sounds like he's speaking some common sense. This surely can't be seen as transphobic.
No, I mean, to be honest, whilst it's obviously great that he's spoken up in support of J.K. Rowling, I did think it was a bit mealy-mouthed. I mean, to say there must be some sort of way forward and there must be some sort of compromise, well, I'd like to know which women's rights he thinks it's okay to compromise, how many children he thinks it's okay to put on puberty blockers, rendering them potentially well. I think it's actually a little bit, it's almost slightly backhanded, really. I mean, yes, it's great that he's supported her, but he also admitted to using trans sensitivity readers, which I thought was, surprising to say the least.
So he said he's using trans sensitivity readers for his own work?
Yeah, and I mean, there's something that I thought was particularly ironic about that, is that, obviously that's predicated on the idea that you can't, as an author, entirely get into somebody else's mind, entirely into their mindset, which I think is a really dreadful admission for an author to make, because you would expect that to be part of the point of literature, is to get into other people's minds. And moreover, thinking about the trans issue in particular, well, I don't ever remember being asked by, for example, Eddie Izzard if it was okay for him to wear my identity. Well, wear my sensitivity readers, please. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And Irvine Welsh said that there's such a massive difference between the majority of trans people and how they're represented on social media. Do you think he's right?
No, to be honest, I think a lot of them are very angry. I think there's a lot of misdirected anger. So, for example, today there was a demonstration in Birmingham of women's rights activists, and they were mobbed, they were surrounded, the police didn't step in to support them, they were harassed, they were intimidated by this apparently vulnerable minority. So I have no doubt there are some people who suffer with gender dysphoria. I also have absolutely no doubt there are a lot of men for whom it's a fetish, and apparently we're not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the people making the fuss and making the violent threats, they don't seem to be the sort of genuine trans women who just want to pass in society and get on with their lives. They seem to be more like women like me, who are just out there looking for a ruck.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I think that's part of the anger they feel is quite often because it is in some ways motivated by a fetish. I think there's no surprise in a way that this movement has emerged at around the same time as free online pornography has become a huge industry. So I think when you have a woman who says no, I don't believe you, I think that's actually taken as a very visceral, personal reaction, which I think accounts for a lot of the anger.
And do you think there'll be a turning point soon where everyone settles down a bit and we can all hold hands and move forward together?
I mean, I think the point we need to aim for is to wrestle back reality. I think there's, I get a bit annoyed with people sort of looking for middle ways, looking to concede points, because frankly, until 5 minutes ago, we all knew that there were two sexes. It wasn't controversial. Nothing that J.K. Rowling has said is remotely controversial. She was right when it came to the Tavistock, for example, which has now been closed. She's been right when it comes to women-only spaces. Of course women need women-only space when they've been abused by men. These aren't controversial things to say, and I often feel like the burden of proof is reversed in a way with this one. It shouldn't be up for us to explain why women don't have penises. It really should be up to the other side to say, to make their arguments, and then we can decide whether we agree with them or not. But the idea of having them imposed, which they have been quite stealthily by lobby groups, is a norm.
And J.K. Rowling, I mean, she's famously never actually said something transphobic. If she had, then people could hold that up as evidence. But they say she appears transphobic. She has the aura of transphobia. But they can't really pin it on her. Why do you think she's singled out for such hate?
Well, I think because she's the only one that's had a bit of courage, frankly. I mean, there are so few authors who are speaking out. And I think that's in part because the chair of the Society of Authors, Joanne Harris, is essentially a trans activist. I don't think that helps matters. And, I think there's a kind of an emerger of silence across particularly in sort of elitist industries, like your authors, like your media. I think there is a real kind of clique of right thinkers and wrong thinkers, and nobody wants to be on the wrong side of that.
I see. Anyway, Jo Bartosz, journalist and writer, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And let's bring in my esteemed panel. Do either of you agree with Irvine Welsh? No? OK. That's that question answered.
Well, I mean, exactly as Joe just said, this idea that you have to wrestle back reality is pretty frustrating, isn't it? That this idea that, if somebody behaves really, really badly and then they can kind of give 50% and it's like, now we're in the middle. It's like, no, you started this. Why do
Can you not point at me, please, when you're saying this?
Sorry. It's outrageous.
Yeah, and Scotland's obviously the place for this kind of thing, this debate to happen.
Absolutely, with the stunning trans woman that is Isla Bryson and her massive clitoris.
Yeah, and we invented the kilt, which was an early attempt at trans women.
Exactly. So, it's all good news.
I'm disappointed that he's bringing in sensitivity readers.
Yeah.
I would expect, if you're Irvine Welsh, you've proved yourself. I mean, I went to see...
The whole point of Irvine Welsh is he's supposed to be the most visceral, shocking, outrageous, taboo-busting author, but then he's got sensitivity readers.
And they shouldn't be the ones determining what the art is. I mean, I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but I want to hear from the artist, not the person policing the artist.
But the problem is with publishing is like a lot of these, these liberal, in inverted commas, industries, they're the ones who are going to be deciding whether the writer gets published. And it's very, very difficult now for authors to actually get their books published, particularly if they go against prevailing orthodoxies. Like you even saw it with Jordan Peterson, where I think it was in Canada, there's these young kids who work in the publishing house, staging demonstrations and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And obviously Jordan got published because he's Jordan, but how many people who are coming through, really talented new young novelists,
self-censor?
Yeah, because they just know that if they go against this prevailing orthodoxy, they are not going to get published. And let's be honest, essentially, they're not going to have a career.
And we've seen a similar thing happen with the Stand Comedy Club, which is going to provide a platform to Joanna Cherry, who's a gender-critical lesbian, and then the staff at the Stand cancelled the performance by saying they weren't willing to work. Now it is going ahead because it turned out it breached the Equalities Act to cancel it. But I mean, that's a similar way.
It is similar, and that's why you need the Irvine Welsh, the Jordan Petersons. I went to see Lionel Schreiber talking about sensitivity readers recently. She's having none of it. Good for her. And those people kind of paving the way for the baby writers to come up, aren't they? Because if you're a new writer, you're far more likely to self-censor in the first place or invite sensitivity readers in so that you can get your work published. It's like, no, we want to hear the real. Give me the art and I'll decide if I like it or not. Don't tell me what I can and can't have. It drives me mad.
Do you think we'll get more celebrities now that J.K. Rowling and then Irvine Welsh have sort of broken the seal on this? Do you think we'll get more celebrities following their footsteps through the minefield?
No. Do you remember when Guy Pearce said something like, a person is an actor is a person who can play any role, or something like that, and an actor should be able to play any role. It lasted about 2 days before the wrath of Hollywood came down, and this is how you know he messed up. He then did 2 little screenshots of apology and pinned it to his Twitter. Anyway, that's how you know that somebody, the agent has had a little word.
Screenshot apologies.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's still lots to come on Free Speech Nation. We're not allowed to call criminals anymore. OK, so what do we call them? We'll be speaking to a former prisoner to get the answer, and I'll treat you to my musings on the migrant housing mess. Don't you move a muscle.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
There's plenty more still to come in Free Speech Nation this week, but let's get a news update first from Tatiana Sanchez.
Leo, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. A new ballot for strikes is set to be held later this month. Gatwick Airport was forced to shut a runway for almost an hour following a suspected drone incident. Flights were temporarily suspended and 12 inbound flights were diverted to other airports. British Airways says one of its flights was affected, landing at Stansted Airport before refuelling and returning to Gatwick. A spokesperson for the airport says passenger safety is the airport's absolute priority and the investigations have now been completed. Suggestions of unrest within the Conservative Party are being downplayed after the Prime Minister was blamed for the recent local election results. Rishi Sunak's facing criticism after nearly 1,000 councillors were lost and the decision to scale back post-Brexit plans to scrap EU laws. Former Home Secretary Priti Patel accused the leader of failing to listen to his party, adding the Tories hadn't covered itself in glory since Boris Johnson's leadership. Energy Secretary Grant Shapps says the Prime Minister is doing the right things and people need to be patient.
I think this, and she was referring to this set of elections, which were obviously very difficult for the Conservatives. They weren't a good set of elections for us. But this was the first opportunity people have had to comment on all the shenanigans of last summer and those many leadership changes that went on. I think people were venting their frustration. I actually think that Rishi Sunak, in his 5-point plan to halve inflation and grow the economy and reduce our debt and cut the NHS waiting list and stop the small boats, I think he's doing exactly the right things. And let's judge him against that. Let's judge this government against that when it comes to the next election.
Counting's underway in Turkey to establish who will be the country's next leader. Voters have been deciding on whether President Erdogan, who's been in power for 20 years, should be re-elected. Opinion polls ahead of the ballot gave his main rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, a slight lead. A clearer indication of the first round results expected later this evening. And the Ukrainian president has received an award during his visit to Germany. He was presented with the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen in recognition of the Ukrainian people and Volodymyr Zelensky's fight for freedom against what's been described as the unjustified Russian war of aggression. The board of directors said the award underscores the fact that Ukraine is part of Europe and the country supports the bloc's European values. Later tonight, Zelensky will meet with the French President Emmanuel Macron. The pair will sit for a dinner meeting where France will reaffirm its military and humanitarian support for the war-torn country. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Just to say, if you're watching the brilliant Alistair and Ella from Living Freedom Summer School in the previous hour, you still have a week to book your place for June 29th to 1st July. So you better get your skates on. Head to livingfreedom.org.uk. Now, let's get some more questions from the audience. Our first question is from Brian.
Hello. Have the Oscars taken their new inclusion and diversity standards too far?
Have the Oscars taken their new inclusion and diversity standards too far? Starting in 2024, films will be required to meet new inclusion standards to be eligible for the Academy Awards for Best Picture. They'll have to have a certain percentage of actors or crew from underrepresented racial or ethnic groups. Richard Dreyfuss, the actor who's in Jaws and some other good films, said, "They make me vomit." What do you make of this, Francis?
Well, look, the reality is that Hollywood is famously incredibly nepotistic. It always has been. So there's part of me that goes, oh, this might actually be a good thing. But if you're doing it to be tokenistic, then quite frankly, it's pointless. What you need is some people outside of Hollywood who aren't paedophiles.
Cressida, I mean...
Well, speaking of paedophiles, in the comedy industry, no, I really hate when there's representation quotas. And I mean, I appreciate that gender and race are two different topics, but we see this in comedy all the time. Female actor preferred. And then as soon as you get booked, you think, did I get booked because they like my work, or did they book me because they needed to tick a box? And I just think it is so undermining to the people who end up getting the work.
Well, it's obviously to tick a box, Cresta. Sorry to bubble. But yeah, no, I think you're both right. It's I mean, it takes away the sort of the achievements. Then people are going to question and say, oh well, that was just a tokenistic booking. That was that wasn't on their own merit.
Well, look, and it's incredibly hypocritical as well, because if you look at how much it costs to be an actor and how much it trains, particularly in this country, they've taken away loads of bursaries, they've increased the fees. So acting and the theatre is becoming the preserve of the upper middle class.
You don't need to... What training? What training to put on a hat and pretend you're somebody else? That's not a...
Well, that's what you do, Leo. The moment you get out here, mate, you talk like me, you're vegan, and you're for the Green Party.
I would never talk like
you. And you went to RADA.
I am middle class, Francis. That's why I'd never talk like you. Anyway, our next question is from George, a viewer at home. Should all vegans be embarrassed? This is relating to Bear Grylls, who says that he's embarrassed that he ever promoted veganism and now shuns veggies completely in favour of red meat. Sounds like Louis Schaefer. Anyway, Grylls, who's now 48, insists his blood and bone marrow diet is much better for his health. Nutrition experts slammed both his unhelpful comments and his food choices. The iconic adventure and TV presenter claimed he's never felt stronger and that his skin and gut have never been better after binning a plant-based diet. Krista, what do you make of this?
Oh, it's the same stuff, isn't it? Why does everybody have to be so extreme? Why does he have to go from lentils only to bone marrow only? So why don't you calm down and eat a balanced diet?
Well, it's Bear Grylls. He can't. I mean, I'm surprised he's not he's eating bone marrow and blood. I'm surprised he's not eating eyes from a live sheep while he's wrestling it. I mean, this is a guy who climbs. Wasn't he the youngest person to climb Everest?
I don't know. I'm not that familiar with his work, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think this.
I'm just amazed he's 48. I thought he was 12, running about in shorts, living like a Boy Scout perpetually.
Is that a lifestyle you'd enjoy?
I would actually. Yeah, I would.
I can't believe there's a vegan called Bear Grylls. I mean, that is ridiculous. When have you seen a vegan grill anything? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you think of a vegan animal, you're not going to think of a bear.
Yeah. So you think if he was called Carrot Steamer?
Yes, absolutely. Then you go, yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. This is what I think a vegan is.
Yeah. Krista, have you ever tried a plant-based diet?
I have, yeah. I did a couple of years on that.
Right, how was
We've all
it?
had a youth, haven't we? It was fine. I didn't feel any different. I think we're so spoiled for food in the West. We're so... Not everybody, but I mean, it was fine. I went to Holland and Barrett and bought the pretend cheese and coped and moved on with my life. But I do think he should be a bit embarrassed, because if you promote anything that interferes with other people's lives to that extent, you kind of... Yeah, you should be embarrassed. You've caused them to take this great step.
So you think dozens of people could be now getting out of breath walking upstairs because of Bear Grylls promoting veganism?
Or maybe they just spent too much money on tofu. I don't know, but I wouldn't tell other people what to do, I suppose. That's why he should be embarrassed.
He should give the money back from his cookbooks, prove he's really sorry, mate. Let's have some of that, Grylls.
Anyway, donate it to a butcher.
Yeah.
Anyway, our next question is from Peter. Peter, over here.
OK. Should teenagers get the vote, or do you think they're still a little bit too immature politically?
Should teenagers get the vote? This is Sir Keir Starmer is considering plans to allow millions of EU citizens to vote in general elections under Labour government, and they're also mulling whether to expand the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, which seems insane to me, because the younger you get, the more stupid you get.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Well, they're not allowed to do anything else, are they? They're not allowed to smoke, get married. What else can't they do? Drive, when does that start? So
I think drive you can start at 16.
You can drive, because you can drive to the polling station. But no, it's too young, isn't it? I mean, it's far too young.
Yeah. And Francis, do you think we should also look at perhaps rolling it back from women?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are
some arguments for this. Pearl Davis actually argues for this herself because it would support her political leanings because these aren't these opinions are not mine, but she wants that so that more right-wing people will vote and she'll get the party she wants.
Well, that's what this is all about. I mean, Keir Starmer and Labour, they want an electorate who's more likely to vote Labour. So by bringing in, I think it's 6 million, sorry, we're not at that stage yet. 6 million EU nationals who live in the UK. I mean, they're assuming that they're going to vote left-wing. I mean, I think that is
the first time around.
A bit of an assumption. I think we've seen, certainly, especially second and third generation immigrants can become quite conservative. But I mean, it is something. And I know in Scotland the SNP was looking at this because young people are young and idealistic and complete idiots. They haven't had that life experience that tells you, listen, you can't follow an ideology. Vote Tory.
Well, it's a very good point, but if you think about it, imagine if Jeremy Corbyn had 6 million people extra voting for him. He still would have lost. There's no way he would have actually made it. Look, the reality is...
More people would have been upset, which would have been fantastic.
Yeah, look, the reality is it's a deeply cynical ploy by the Labour Party. What they're trying to do is they're looking at this whole selection of voters. They know that they skew left because young people frequently do, and then they think that actually that is a way for them to be able to secure this entire group of people, make them more electable and not actually have to have decent policies. When really all they need to do is watch a Conservative Party drive this country off a cliff and just go vote for us, we've got no policies. Which is going to be the next general election.
Yeah, it's a really inspiring election proposition. Now we've got a question from Tricia, who's emailed in. Should fat people be legally protected from weight discrimination?
They're called people of weight, Leo.
So, fat people will be protected from discrimination under law passed in New York. As critics warn, it opens the door to sue anyone and everything. I mean, how are they going to enforce that on Tinder? That's what I want to know.
Look, I'm just going to say, look, I feel sorry for fat people. They don't have their own movement, do they? There's no BLM for fat people. Big Lives Matter. Thank you. That's it for me now. I'm retiring after that one.
Body positivity movement, surely.
Yeah, but no one's on board with that.
Well, you can only have about 3 people on board.
I think it's a bit mad, isn't it? I remember reading a Ben Elton novel when I was a teenager where everybody gets really angry with each other and at the end they all try and sue God. And it's not that unlikely now, is it?
Yeah.
I mean... Yeah,
and it seems strange to lump this discrimination in with other characteristics such as race or sexuality, which you don't pick and choose.
I mean, with gender, you can now pick and choose, mate.
Yeah, with gender, you can pick and choose. But with obesity, you can pick and choose whether to open that fridge door. It's not the same as race.
I mean, the fact, to me, it is beyond parody. The fact that people... there are fact activists, and they equate their struggle with the civil rights.
Fat activists? What happens if they get too active and start losing that weight?
Yeah,
that's a bit of a conundrum.
But what if you're a peaceful fat person and you're just completely mortified by this, and you're thinking, oh God, now people aren't going to employ me, even though I work in IT and it doesn't matter that I can't run around.
Yeah.
I would just be so embarrassed, wouldn't you?
Would it make you comfort eat? I mean,
yes, it would.
Yeah, I mean the entire thing is ridiculous, and it shows it in a way like how comfortable we've become as a society that fat people now identify as an oppressed group. Do you remember when they just identified as jolly? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That was it. Oh, he's fat, he's funny.
Yeah.
Obviously some deep-seated trauma, which means he eats too much, but it was the 90s, no one cared.
Yeah.
And we had an NHS that kind of worked.
But this is getting away from it being a problem, isn't it? It's pretending that it's not a problem, and I'm afraid I'm of the opinion that it is a problem for the person suffering it.
Yeah, and it's something that perhaps people need a spur, for the good of their health. I know we've got a movement of people saying you can be healthy at any size. You can't really be healthy at 32 stone, I'm afraid. It's ridiculous.
They all die young.
And they always try to, a lot of people try and make excuses. They say, I've got an overactive thyroid or an underactive thyroid or whatever. No, you've got an overactive elbow. That is lifting the kebab to your face.
Do you know what? So, everybody will know. So my mum's Venezuelan, right? And my uncle was morbidly obese, and he's always said, I've got an underactive thyroid, whatever it is, I'm big bone, whatever, I can't lose weight, I've tried everything. Communism communism came in, 2 years, normal weight.
Socialism is the solution to obesity.
Exactly. I mean, it's not, because look at Scotland.
That's not socialism, that's just getting money from England and spending it on Mars bars. Anyway, our final question is from Annika. Is Annika in the studio?
Yes, right here. Yeah. Should fat cats stop working from their country homes?
This is not fat cats. Well, I know we've just been talking about fat people. This is not literal fat cats. This is, should fat cats stop working from home in their country mansions? As wealthy company managers are told to stop working from home in their country pads and come back into the office just like their lower paid staff. I mean, what do you make of this, Chris?
Well, no, because the lower paid staff are obviously having a lot more fun running around not doing any work. If the boss comes back, they're going to have to get on with it, aren't they? So I'm surprised that they don't want to come back. My experience is usually the people at the top of the food chain, they want to be there to see what's going on.
Yeah, and crack the whip. I mean, how are you going to crack the whip if you're at home?
No, this is it. It's almost like nobody wants to do any work, Leo. That's basically it, isn't it? No one wants to work, and no one wants to go to work. We had the pandemic where we basically sat down, the government gave us free money, and it subsequently tanked the economy. And that's what is happening all around the world. Banks are collapsing. We don't really talk about it because it's a bit depressing. So everyone just sits at home and basically does about an hour's work before just playing solitaire.
And we've seen, I mean, the statistics came out showing that a huge number of people are now claiming sickness benefit and going on the sick, because, I mean, you can do it more easily now and getting signed off, so they can still enjoy that furlough lifestyle of sitting on the couch and watching Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. So why would you do work? The thing that blew my mind is there was loads of stories about people, when the pandemic happened, they started doing their job. They went, actually, this is really easy. And then they got another job at the same level, so they were effectively doubling their income, and they didn't tell anyone.
So they're working from home on like more than one job.
Yeah, and smashing it. The only problem came is when you had to come in for a meeting.
Right.
And you had to think of an excuse why you can come in.
I wonder if I could host Eurovision and do this at the same time. This is something for me to
You wouldn't have to change outfits.
Anyway, still to come on Free Speech Nation, have prisons gone woke? Before that, though, I'll be treating you to my take on where we should be housing illegal migrants. See you in a few minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Leo Kearse. Now, Britain has been wrestling with the issue of small boat crossings for years now. I've got the perfect solution if Rishi's got the balls to do it. Cross-channel migration needs to be stopped. It's dangerous for the people doing it, it funds criminal gangs, and it adds to the migration burden, with net migration set to top 1 million this year. I don't know where people are going to park. People are gaming our generous asylum system to come and stay here and jumping the queue in front of people who follow the rules. And many of them are culturally distant, with attitudes to women, LGBTQ people and religion that don't mesh with a Western liberal democracy. So we see grooming gangs and de facto blasphemy laws. The Manchester Arena bomber was rescued from Libya by the Royal Navy. The Liverpool maternity hospital bomber was an asylum seeker. While most illegal migrants are just regular men looking for a better life, you don't need many bad ones to have a big problem. And for all the talk of seeking asylum, cross-channel migrants aren't fleeing war, they're fleeing France. France isn't perfect. There's snooty customer service, dog poo on the pavement and terrible rock music, but it's not a war-torn hellhole. So even though it's difficult and unpleasant to do, the issue does need to be tackled. The Rwanda plan attempts to do this. A similar plan successfully reduced illegal boats to 0 in Australia. But some people have taken the opportunity to virtue signal, saying we should have open borders. The Archbishop of Canterbury says it's morally unacceptable. The unelected King Charles called the plan appalling. Thousands of pious Guardian-reading lefties make the same sanctimonious pronouncements on Twitter every day. But these people are free from the consequences of illegal migration. King Charles is surrounded by armed men and doesn't need to worry about house prices or getting a doctor's appointment. Justin Welby resides at Lambeth Palace, which has high walls and tight security. Middle-class Guardian readers live in leafy suburbs, far removed from the deprived communities where migrants are housed. Yesterday, historians, including the great Al Murray, signed a letter saying that refugees shouldn't be housed at RAF Scampton, home of the dam busters. They say it'll be damaging to the airfield. I'm sorry, but if plonking hundreds of illegal migrants on a concrete military facility damages it, what do you think happens to Britain's sleepy towns and villages when their population is tripled overnight with hundreds of fighting-age men from culturally distant lands? In Britain, you can't build a shed in your garden without spending months getting planning permission and consent from the neighbours. But if the government can move 1,500 asylum seekers into Linton-on-Ouse without checking on anyone, it's nuts. So I'm proposing this. We have the technology, using Experian, to identify people's political opinions right down to the household level. So let's house cross-channel migrants in the communities that ask for them. Rishi should set up the porta cabins in leafy, well-heeled boroughs next to latte-sipping Corbynistas. The Prime Minister should commandeer Clarence House and Lambeth Palace and place 100 undocumented migrants in each one. Let the chattering classes live with the consequences of their opinions. When they do, perhaps they'll agree something actually does need to be done. All of that, of course, is my opinion, and you're free to disagree with me. Let's bring in my panel and get their thoughts.
Right, so here's the thing. I think if we are actually going to discourage people from coming to this country, what we do is we get them and then we plonk them in Croydon, mate. They'll just wake up, they'll look around, and they'll be like, could we please go back to war-torn Syria?
What do you think? I mean, this is a serious point. Do you think people have, perhaps from watching television shows or films, Hugh Grant films, they've got an unrealistic expectation of how nice Britain actually is?
Yeah, exactly. Let's just take them on a guided tour of the north. That'll discourage them. They won't want to live there. Come on.
Say that with
Why
that
have you gone silent? You know it's dreadful. Look at it. This is a London audience going, can I laugh? You're fine. You're never going to go to the north. Man up.
I'm going to go to the north. I mean, that's where I'm from.
No, and that's why you moved down here.
I don't know. When I first heard your proposals, I thought, well, that's fantastic, isn't it? Let's put them in people's houses in Islington. But I'm not sure about somebody imposing who you can have in your front room. We've just had 2 years of that from Matt Hancock, and I didn't think very much of it. Also, if you're coming from war-torn Syria, I mean, do you want to be put in a house with a Guardian reader? I don't know, that could be quite... Maybe do that and turn it into reality TV. I mean, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to see the values of those two sets of families being thrashed out.
Well, yeah, because I mean we're seeing a clash already starting. I mean we've had there's gay people in Reading attacked by an Islamist, and in Belgium it's an unverified video, but it appears to show Islamists shutting down an LGBTQ stand at a university. I mean this could be the clash in the future as LGBTQ grows, and also more traditional conservative Islamism grows in the UK. I mean, those two communities aren't always going to be allied.
No, they're not indeed. And look, the reality is this is what happens when you do not have a coherent policy on immigration, where it has been fudged for years, it has been equated and conflated with racism, so that we can't actually have a sane and rational debate about how many people we should let into this country, because the reality is we do need immigration. We also have a duty to accept a certain number of refugees. But what we can't have is people coming here illegally and us not knowing how many of these people are coming into the country.
Yeah, but when you say, we need immigration, is that because we're facing a demographic cliff because people aren't having children?
Yeah, it is because we're facing it.
But then wouldn't people have children if they could afford a house?
Yes, that would be a good idea.
They can't afford a house because so many people are coming into the country, and there's only certain... I mean, it's not like people are bringing a semi-detached house when they come across in the boat. It's very bad for the flotation ability.
To be honest with you, that's only part of the problem. The reality is that in the 80s and the early 90s, Thatcher sold off the housing stock, council housing stock, and successive governments have completely failed to replace it, which means that we've got a housing stock...
The houses didn't disappear. I mean, the houses are still there. So what we've got a problem is a lack of supply in the market, and obviously because of NIMBYism, there are constraints on planning permission, there are constraints on building too many new houses. But wouldn't a stable population be more... I mean, I call me old-fashioned, but I think the main route of migration into the UK should be through women's birth canals.
Look, I'm in agreement with you, but the problem is that we just simply haven't been building housing in any shape or form for what we need in this country, which is also part of the problem. But nobody is going to want to address that, because if you think about it, what is the number one asset that people have in this country? It's their property.
I was going to say Pokemon, but yeah, property.
And are you really going to say to the people that are voting for you, namely the people who vote, who are the people who are older in years, who are actually property holders, that you are going to devalue their one main asset? It's not much of a winning ticket at the polls.
Yeah, but Cresta, I mean, one thing that worries me is racism and the rise of the far right, by which I mean the actual genuine
the real far
right, which could, I mean, it's going to be exacerbated if we have, I mean, the net migration figures are pretty shocking. It's over a million. This year, and this is going to stir up resentment and possibly lead to more racism against people who came earlier and are completely integrated and living here happily.
It's a luxury belief, isn't it? For the people that make these decisions, the people pushing the agenda don't have to live with the consequences. And if you ask people in the types of work that might be taken away, they'll have a different opinion. So yeah, it could lead to some really unpleasant scenes.
And also, as well, the people talking about these policies who are advocating open borders, they've got ridiculous slogans which says no person is illegal, which, let's be fair, is something Jeffrey Epstein would say. So it just doesn't even make sense on a logical basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you complain about how illegal migrants are treated, or if you complain about any effort to reduce the amount of illegal immigration, you're basically saying, well, we should have open borders. Because if you have any, if you don't have complete unfettered immigration, then it means that some people are going to be illegal, and then obviously they have to be dealt with.
Yeah, I agree. And you always get this argument where people want to convince you of the economics of immigration, and they'll tell you, we should have immigration because it's good for the economics of the country. And you say, OK, so then in that case, if I could prove to you that it wasn't, would you say no immigration? And they wouldn't, because they want to say, come all ye, open borders. It's a kind idea.
Yeah.
But it gets backed up with these economic debates. And
it's one of those things that feels like the right idea until you can see some of the ramifications of having unfettered immigration from places that have deeply different cultural values to the UK. Anyway, sorry to put you in a bit of a downer with that, but coming up on Free Speech Nation, we'll be talking to former prisoner and founder of the charity User Voice about the correct way to refer to prisoners. Apparently the word convict is offensive to them. See you in a few minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, as Labour plan to give EU citizens a vote in general elections, Sir Keir Starmer has effectively started a campaign to rejoin the bloc.
In my Take at 10, I'll be reacting to the news that the World Health Organization wants 4-year-olds to learn about their sexuality and gender. And as the ITV This Morning crisis deepens, I have a big announcement to make. You won't want to miss it. Class politics legend Anne Widdecombe, top government minister Paul Scully, tomorrow's papers and my pundits. We're live from 9.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Prison officers have been ordered to stop calling criminals convicts on the grounds that it is offensive. Civil servants at the Prison Service headquarters have also instructed warders to drop the phrase ex-con for former prisoners and refer to them instead as persons with lived experience. I mean, yeah, lived experience of committing a burglary or a rape, or prison leavers. I mean, some staff have been left shaking their heads at a time when jails are suffering from record overcrowding and their colleagues are leaving in droves. This is going on. Joining me to discuss this is former prisoner and founder of the charity User Voice and lived expert, Mark Johnson, MBE. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello.
Is it offensive to call an ex-prisoner an ex-con?
Well, I think the PR around this issue is a bit of a car crash from the Ministry of Justice, and the civil service, I think, have got a really poor track record with sending very clear, sort of purpose-driven bits of communications out. I mean, the fundamental principle behind it is right, and it's one that I've campaigned on probably for a very long time now, and that is that when people get sentenced, they serve their sentence in a prison or a criminal justice order, and post that sentence, we need to reintroduce them into society in a way that doesn't stigmatise them. So currently, at 11 years old, if you commit an offence, that criminal conviction can stay with you for the rest of your life. So it's like a life sentence by instalments through the stigma that's associated with it. If you look at the history, not so much the prison service, because I don't actually think anybody is bothered what they get called, because at the moment, 80% of British prisons are on 22 hours a day bang up. Now, what that really means is the UN wrote a ruling through Nelson Mandela, actually, his incarceration, and it said anything over 22 hours a day bang up could be identified as torture. Yeah. And that's what we've got going on in British prisons. We've got these things they call
22 hours bang up. Just to clarify, that means 22 hours being locked up. Is that in solitary confinement or just confined to a cell?
So cells are solitary confinement. That's literally the current. So you mentioned about staff leaving in their droves. Chris Grayling started the rehabilitation revolution, and literally so many prison staff left at that point or got fired, and they've never been able to recoup the level of staffing from pre-2010. And so then when COVID hit, they recruited loads more staff. But because the lockdown conditions were such at a level of like 23.5 hour a day bang up, as soon as those restrictions got eased a little bit, all the staff left because they'd never been used to dealing with prisoners before. So right. I can tell the public via your show that they're being ripped off on a royal level because all the supply chains that are going into education, therapeutic, etc., they can't get access to prisoners because they're behind a door, and the regime is such, they call it restricted regime. If you imagine, like you said about rapists, and this is the sort of media top line of it. That's not who we lock up predominantly. Do you know what I mean? Who we lock up are the drug addicts, mentally ill, neurodiverse, etc., predominantly, and all we're doing is neglecting them. They call these distraction packs colouring books and remedial, like maths and English, being shoved underneath the door without any teachers, without any teacher support, and then those people are coming out in our society literally unrehabilitated, and we've paid the same amount of money as what we did when the staffing was at full regime.
Yeah, I mean,
so
this seems It seems ridiculous to not rehabilitate people, and if people are locked up for 22 hours a day, like you say, there aren't the opportunities to, even if there are classes, people going in, running programs, they won't have that access, that contact with the prisoner to run those classes. And without breaking that link, people are going to come out and re-offend again with, burglary or whatever acquisitive crime to feed a drug habit.
Well, 4 in 10 people leaving British prisons today leave homeless, right? They're given tents to go into the community with. The probation service, who are supposed to be this body that literally works with prisoners, supporting them and planning for their release, they're at 100% capacity. That's what they say. What I know from basically people that are coming out of prison is that they're completely neglected. Again, they're not even getting basic GP appointments, referrals to drug centres. I mean, under this government, they've literally closed down about 2/3 of all drug rehabilitation centres in this country as well. So the services just aren't there. And I think recently, Dominic Raab, who's no longer there, and I'm very grateful for that. I've never really get political in my life, but what basically he was doing is fanning the flame around sensational and polarised views of everybody's a murderer in prison, and then pinning the need to remove us from the European Courts of Human Rights on the back of it. And that is literally getting politics meddling into sentencing, which I think is really dangerous because the public is educated via the media. And I have to say, it's not an education at all. Do you know what I mean? It's just literally, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's literally, you're going to be paying for it. Their proposal is 20,000 new prison places of this neglect. And we need to start to talk about what works regarding rehabilitation. We have to do that. And so Mark, if it means,
So no, I was just going to say, I mean, we've got to wrap it up soon, unfortunately. But I mean, what would you say? Bring it back to the original point. What would you say is the correct term to refer to former prisoners using?
Well, it's not that you could call me anything you want to, right? I don't care. But the key is about when I go for housing insurance, I've helped thousands of people, I've got an MB and everything. When I go for house insurance, it says, have I got a criminal conviction, right? And it was over 30 years ago. I have to say yes, and I have to pay a premium that's higher than anybody else's.
That's ridiculous, because surely the last house that's going to get burgled is an ex-con. You put that on the door, nobody's going to want you're not going to want that guy coming down the stairs with a golf club. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Mark, thanks so much for joining us tonight. That's Mark Johnson, the former prisoner and founder of the charity Use Your Thoughts. Thank you, Mark. He's an MP. And my esteemed panel, Francis, what do you make of that? You look a bit like you could have been banged up.
If I was banged up, I wouldn't last very long, mate. I'd pick the option of a women's prison. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'd get what's it called? Prison onset gender dysphoria.
Yeah. I don't think you'd need to specify that. I think they'd put you in one of them anyway. Cressida.
My jaw's on the floor, 22 hours a day.
Like Francis if he went to prison.
I thought this is what we joined Amnesty International for, is that 22 hours a day? I'm just stunned. I didn't know that.
23.5 hours during lockdown, which is, I mean, we talk about the impact of lockdown. I mean, I hadn't even thought of the impact on the prison population.
Right. I mean, you'd take your pet hamster out of the cage for longer than that, wouldn't you? It's just, I'm absolutely stunned. That's horrific. And the idea that we think people are being rehabilitated and actually they're being given a workbook under the door, I mean...
Yeah,
disgusting.
It's absolutely horrific, because you think, these people have ended up in jail. Actually, that is a chance for us as a society to help rehabilitate these people, so actually when they go out, they're not going to re-offend. Yeah. It's a chance...
And it would also help the economy. I mean, the economy is starved of workers at the moment, so if we could reskill and rehabilitate some prisoners, they can go in and they could become prison wardens.
Yeah, exactly. Poacher turned gatekeeper. But if all we're doing is effectively locking them up and leaving these people to rot, you go... I mean, that is torture, isn't it? Yeah. 22 hours in a cell? I mean, that is horrific.
I mean, they do have a PlayStation 5. But anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, me and my fellow comedians turn agony uncle / auntie / insert preferred pronoun here, and we'll bring you some social sensations from the tawdry world of the internet. See you in a couple of minutes.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Section of Free Speech Nation. Now, every week we dedicate this part of the show to the world of social media and often the stories that are threatening to cancel someone or something. But most of the time, it's just some funny stuff some idiot did online. First up is this video from last night's Eurovision.
What's that look of Melania Trump?
Shall we get back to the competition? I said, shall we get
I want to see Mel treading butter some more.
The next act, hoping to become a Eurovision icon, ready to take the stage. It's Armenia!
I'm liking that action, Francis. I think I've got the same loo brush at home.
Yeah, I'm sure that there were a few men copying that action at home, mate.
Probably not. Well, your face is on that screen, Francis. No offence. Cresta, what did you make of that?
What have I just been shown? This is why I don't watch Eurovision. It's just not my thing. I'm sure she's very talented.
Yeah.
Whatever that was. Fascinating, bold choreography.
I think it was butter churning, but
yeah.
I'm not sure. That's
So
certainly...
this is why we voted Brexit, mate.
Yeah, it was. I've been told, the producer just told me it is butter churning. That's certainly how I churn butter. That's what I call it. Anyway, next up, we've got the influencer who purposefully crashed his plane just to get clicks. He might get up to 20 years in prison, though. Let's watch the evidence.
I'm over the mountains and I get out and exit out.
So he did have a parachute, I'm assuming. So he jumped out of the plane. Yeah. He jumped out of the plane, which I've just been told by somebody in the audience was a rented plane. I mean, I wouldn't even do that to a rented Kia. Never mind a Cessna. That's. I mean, I hope he paid for the excess insurance.
2.9 million views, though, Leo.
Is that all?
Yeah. What do you mean it's... You know how difficult it is to get views on YouTube, mate? 2.9 million? Yeah, and he jumped out of a plane risking life and limb?
But you see people just unboxing toys or doing the ASMR, getting way more views than that, and they don't go to prison for 20 years, and they don't jump out of a plane they've rented.
That's why the algorithm is screwing with us, mate.
You're going to do this now, then?
Yeah.
Well, it's been done. Yeah, madness. It's the ultimate, Mum, look at me, isn't it? I just can't relate to it at all. Boys and their toys.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you care about whether or not it was rented. That's what you took from that, not the fact that somebody jumped out of a plane and left it in the air.
Well, somebody's supposed to be picking up that plane on Tuesday to fly it, and it's crashed into a mountain.
Can you imagine if some Colombian drug dealer just getting to the airport going, ay, Juan, where is he playing? We meant to drive all these cocaine.
A lovely bit of racism there from Francis Foster.
My mum's one of them, I can say it.
Next up, I can confirm Francis' mum is a cocaine baron. Next up, we've got this video of Joe Biden talking about white supremacy.
To stand up against the poison of white supremacy, as I did my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy. And I'm not saying this because I'm at a black HBCU. I say it wherever I go.
Lovely. A lovely way to finish that. The biggest threat is white supremacy. And I'm not just saying that because I'm surrounded by black people. Never mind the fact that he's dressed like he's in Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
That was about.
That is incredible. That is incredible. Look, I love Joe Biden. He when you see him speak, it's half normal and then half like it's like starting to scat. He's our first jazz president. You know what I mean? He's Louis Armstrong. It's beautiful. I love him.
Bill Clinton was the first jazz president.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't love it. That makes me feel more stressed watching him do that than watching the guy jump out of the plane. Can I have him back? Yeah, I always feel nervous for him, like he doesn't know what's going on.
Well, I feel like the plane probably landed safer in the one where he jumps out of it with no pilot than if Joe Biden was flying it.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I don't know the context, but what a bizarre...
He's talking about white supremacy, which is actually quite an interesting thing, because we've seen a lot of white supremacy recently in America that isn't by white people. So there's, what was he called, Mauricio Garcia, related to your mum, who's shot up a mall in Texas and has been labelled a white supremacist, but he's actually Mexican, which, you know, I think a lot of white supremacists would have some issue with. They tend to be quite specific about race. And they're also the leader of the Proud Boys is a black Cuban guy.
Yeah, it is. Look, the quality of white supremacy has just gotten down over the years. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember the Nazis? Say what you like about them. Those boys were organised, they look great. You look at these ones now, mate, rubbish.
And that's the bit we're going to clip to end Francis' career. And now we've got the part where we talk through your unfiltered dilemmas. We've got a dilemma now from Christos. It says, I'm very right-wing, but I've recently been sleeping with a very attractive left-wing woman. Don't believe it, they don't exist. The sex is amazing, but she's absolutely deluded and all kumbaya. I pretend... Is she leading a scout troop in the 70s? I pretend I agree with her, just so I can keep on sleeping with her. Am I a bad man? I mean, what do you think, Cresta? Is that?
I think this is a ploy to get more right-wing women.
Yeah.
Well done, Christos. Good attempt. I don't know. I mean, they're both losing out here, aren't they?
They are both losing out. Francis, what do you think?
Just do like every guy does, say, yeah, that's great, well done, lovely. Couldn't have gone better, thank you.
Do you think?
A little insight into France's sex life that we didn't ask for. I mean, you don't exactly live up to the Latin stereotypes.
No, mate,
Francis.
I don't.
Nobody would know your mum's from Venezuela. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining us for Free Speech Nation tonight. This was the week when Liz Truss tried to take on China like a drunk bloke taking on a bouncer outside a pub. Elon Musk proved his free speech credentials are as superficial as a Russian election, and the Labour Party tried to enfranchise any human being that can hold a pencil and possibly vote for them. Thank you so much to my panel. Francis Foster, you've got a gig to plug, Francis.
Yes, come and see me 31st of May at the Etc. Theatre in Camden. That was smooth.
That was smooth. Sounded like a wrestling commentator there for some reason. And Cressida Wetton, have you got anything to plug?
I've got some more dates at the Brighton Fringe,
right?
Which I can't remember the dates of, but it's on my website.
That's good. Well, they're written down somewhere, so that's good. And also to my guests, Stephen Pinker, Alistair Donald, Ella Nixon, Joe Bartosh and Mark Johnston. And if you want to join us live in the studio, please sign up to SRO audiences. Stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan. Goodbye.
Hello again, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office updates, and for the week ahead actually we've got plenty of dry weather in the forecast for many parts of the UK. It's not a completely dry pitch, there will be a few showers around, and it will be feeling a bit cooler as well compared to the last couple of days, and that's because behind this cold front, which will be slowly slipping its way southeastwards through this evening and overnight, there is a cooler air mass waiting in the wings, and that will dominate things into the first part of next week. So we've got quite cloudy skies with some outbreaks of rain slowly slipping their way southeastwards through this evening and overnight. The odd heavier burst is possible across parts of eastern England, but probably not amounting to too much. Elsewhere, skies will tend to clear, and underneath these clearing skies, widely turning quite chilly, so temperatures not too far off freezing in the coldest spots first thing on Monday morning. But the chilly start will be compensated for by a fair amount of sunshine from many places, away from the far southeast of England where rain will clear away through the morning. Otherwise, the sunny start will tend to see cloud infilling through the day and a few showers breaking out across parts of northern Scotland, eastern Scotland down towards eastern England, and the odd heavy burst is possible here in the afternoon. But wherever you are, even in the best of the sunshine further southwest, those temperatures will be down several degrees compared to what we saw over the weekend. Quite a nagging breeze down the North Sea coast.